What if a gun had a soul? This is the question Brad Bird asked when he first pitched his film, The Iron Giant. And it's a question I've never been able to shake, and it's made me wonder, is that even possible? Can a machine have a soul? And while making a replica of the bolt from that same movie, I think I found the answer.
No, 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 no! Why are you making spaghetti?
Like all my projects, it started with a simple drawing. But this time, I wanted to do an experiment. While I loved the movie as a kid, I hadn't actually seen The Iron Giant in over 15 years, and I wanted to see how well I remembered it. So I made this design without any reference, just my childhood memory. Now, at this point, you're probably thinking, Nate, this video was supposed to be about giving a machine a soul, what the hell are you doing? Just bear with me. I promise this isn't clickbait. The process is complicated, and there's a madness to my method. Anyways, my plan was to 3D print the bolt. Now, the proliferation of 3D printing is probably one of the greatest things to happen to the maker community. The sheer amount of projects I see people use it for is astounding. And I'm lucky enough to have a printer in my workshop. But there is a catch.
Print. Print this.
I don't know how to use it. I bought it over a year ago, but I never got around to setting it up, let alone actually making anything with it. But luckily, putting the printer together was easy enough. Actually, it reminded me a lot of a Lego set or IKEA furniture. Simple step-by-step instructions mixed with absolute confusion, near identical parts, and losing vital pieces only to realize that you were blind and they were right in front of you the entire time. But when it's all done, you get to look on your work with pride, satisfaction, and the hope that all those leftover pieces are just extras and not the result of a missed step. The last thing to do was some minor calibrations and adjustments. And once it was done, I spooled up the sample filament and started printing the file that came preloaded on the card. But this was when I hit my first problem. The printer was pretending to work, but it wasn't actually doing anything. It was going through all the motions, it was nice and warm, it had brand new filament, and the nozzle wasn't clogged, but it would not print. And after half an hour of troubleshooting, I figured out the problem. Apparently some of those spare parts were actually important, and I needed to attach them if I wanted the printer to work. So, with the printer now correctly assembled, I tried printing that mysterious sample file. All that I knew was it was called CAT, and while printing it, I hit my second problem. But this time, it wasn't my fault. You see, it turned out that the file was what I assume was meant to be one of those Maneki Neko cats. You know, the little white cats that wave at you outside of ramen shops. I love these things, and I was really excited to see it slowly appearing over the course of a few hours. The problem was that they didn't provide enough sample filament to print the sample file. So instead of a complete Maneki Neko cat, I got a Maneki Neko toothpick holder. Anyways, I still needed to make sure that the printer was actually working correctly, so I downloaded a boat. This design is probably one of the most popular ways to test a 3D printer. Something about the shape of it makes it the perfect benchmark, affectionately earning it the name Benchy. My first attempt turned out to be unseaworthy. Something about the printer wasn't set up right, and it caused my boat to turn into spaghetti. But a half hour of troubleshooting and messing with settings later, and I felt ready to give it another shot. This time, I sat with my printer, hoping for a successful print, but prepared for failure. Patiently waiting for whatever the printer gods had in store for me. By the way, I've decided to name my printer Lorenzo. Get it? Because it's Italian and he's making spaghetti. Jokes are always funnier when you explain them, right? Okay. Anyways, luckily, this time there were no noodles. My troubleshooting paid off and I had my first successful Benchy. My first complete print, ready to set sail. But this project wasn't about cats or boats. I needed Lorenzo to print my drawing in 3D. And that's easy, just make a 3D file like the cat or the Benchy, and I don't know how to do that. My only real experience with any kind of 3D modeling or CAD software is Stud.io, or Studio. I don't know how to pronounce it. Anyways, it's the software for designing Lego sets, and I needed something a bit more powerful. So I downloaded Blender and started messing around with it in the hopes that I could figure out how to make a bolt. Now, this is my first time using it, but Blender turned out to be incredible. For one thing, it's free. Like, just free. No trial period, no paid versions with better features, just free. On top of that, it's good. Like, professional level good. As in Flow, this year's Oscar winner for Best Animated Film, was made using it. After years of dealing with Adobe's crap that somehow becomes worse the more expensive it gets, Blender was a refreshing change. And I think my first attempt was decent. I did have to look at a tutorial to figure out how to make the dome shape, because sometimes even good programs are complicated. All that was left was to drop it into a program called a slicer that makes the 3D shape printable, and I gave it to Lorenzo. There's something weird about the first time that you print a file that you made yourself. It's one thing to see it on a computer screen, but it's something else entirely to see it literally materializing in front of you. It feels almost magical. But then Lorenzo must have gotten hungry because he started making spaghetti again. I think it had something to do with the bolt being tall, with a dome on one end and a point on the other. If it was going to stand, it would need a stronger support than the little base that I gave it. So I went back to the slicer to figure out a solution. And over the next few days, I experimented with different methods. But in the end, what seemed to work best was just encasing the entire bolt in an excessive cocoon of supports. One day, I'm sure I'll figure out how to do this with more finesse, but that won't be today, because today is for sanding and painting. Now, so far, I'd spent most of this project fighting my own lack of experience and a general incompetence. But when it comes to painting things like this, I'm actually pretty confident. You see, I am a giant freaking nerd. Metaphorically. I'm only 5'6" on a good day. But as a metaphorical giant freaking nerd, I am really into painting models. It was mostly Warhammer 40k, Star Wars, and D&D, but the skills still apply. Recognizing the importance of good sanding, knowing how to set up and use an airbrush, remembering that my airbrush is broken, so I have to use normal brushes for the base coats, using washes and dry brushing to bring out details and contrast, and my favorite part, using weathering to tell a story. And when all else fails, you can also cheat and add some dramatic lighting, some sort of error-appropriate filter, and just lower the video resolution to hide any mistakes. I was really happy with the result. But if you've been watching closely, you know that this is not the bolt that I showed you at the start of the video. And that's because I knew I could do better. I wanted to see how close to the movie I could get it. And to do that, I needed to actually watch The Iron Giant for the first time in over 15 years. Now, I didn't remember a ton from this movie, but I did have one vivid memory. A recipe that I'd always wanted to try, but my parents would never allow. Taking a fresh Twinkie and absolutely overfilling it with a glorious excess of whipped cream. As a professional chef, I can say that this is truly a culinary masterpiece. So, with my dinner in hand, I sat down to enjoy one of my favorite childhood films. And I was actually surprised by how much I remembered. The kid, Hogarth Hughes, aka Hog Hug, finds the metal-eating giant in the woods behind his house. And they spent most of the film hiding from FBI agent Stanley. Eventually, the giant goes full badass mode to protect Hogarth and fights a bunch of tanks. As a kid, this battle was my favorite part. And I mean, what wasn't to love? He had all of these insane and creative weapons. But I knew that it all ends with the giant sacrificing himself to save the town from a nuke that Agent Stanley haphazardly ordered. And I remember that all that's left of the giant is the bolt that I've been trying to replicate. But as much as I remembered, my memory was flawed. For one thing, the bolt was way too small. The proportions were all wrong, and I had put ribbing instead of threads. Plus, there were a lot more details on the head of it than I had remembered. So I got to work. I started with upgrading Lorenzo. You see, he's an Ender 3, kind of the Honda Civic of 3D printers. They're a common model for beginners, and there's tons of support and tutorials online. But they're not perfect. They require troubleshooting and aftermarket parts if they hope to compete with the more expensive options. I chose Lorenzo because I wanted to experience that process of problem solving and upgrades to better understand how 3D printers work. And there's a lot that can be upgraded. I got him a new print pad thing to make it easier for the print to stay in place. It's even magnetic, so I can stop using these binder clips. I've got a blanket to help him keep nice and warm because my workshop gets really cold in the winter. There's whatever this is. I don't really understand what it does, but basically everybody recommended it, so of course Lorenzo was getting one. And a nice new full metal squirty thing. As far as I can tell, this part is basically just a really, really complicated hot glue gun. And I have to admit that I was hesitant to make these upgrades. I spent enough hours yelling at my computer to know that swapping out perfectly functional parts for upgrades always carries a risk. Things can go wrong, and sometimes putting it back to the way it was isn't always an option. Lorenzo was doing a good job. In fact, better than I had expected for a stock Ender 3. But I wanted him to be his best, to reach his full potential, and it turned out to be a mostly rewarding experience. Some of the upgrades involved disassembling parts of Lorenzo that I hadn't put together myself. Kind of like a dissection, except it hopefully wouldn't kill him. Is there a word for that? When I try to Google it, I just get a bunch of angry articles from PETA. Anyways, remember how I was worried about something going wrong during the upgrade process? Well, something didn't go wrong. Everything did. The next 2 weeks were a frantic blur of solving problems I didn't truly understand, math that I hate, and the inevitable frustration and anger at things not working the way I wanted. But as I suffered in that crucible of my own incompetence, Lorenzo educated me in the ways of the 3D printer. And at times I may have been what you would call a problem student. Chronically stubborn, shamefully inattentive, and frequently belligerent.
Stop! My fucking God! Stop!
Nevertheless, he was a patient yet demanding teacher. It took weeks longer than I had planned, upgrades I hadn't intended to buy, and a fleet of doomed benchies to sort out all of the problems, but I got him printing again. And I have to admit, I wasn't able to solve everything. Like all of us, I don't think he'll ever be perfect. But I think the knowledge I gained did make it worth the effort. At least, that's what I'll keep telling myself. And so, after I apologized to Lorenzo for my behavior, I ran a few final tests to make sure that everything was back to normal. And with that, he was done. But while he was ready, I wasn't. My original bolt design was really simple, and after watching the movie, I realized that I needed to get better at Blender if I wanted to truly replicate the prop. So I spent the next couple days doing tutorials and improving my 3D modeling and sculpting skills. And I felt inspired to show off what I had learned. So, like many great artists before me, I decided to make a self-portrait, a small statue of myself, capturing both my skill as a maker and my physical features. Fortunately, compared to a human face, the new bolt design was simple. Working on this bolt compared to the first one made me very aware of how much I had forgotten about the movie before. For one thing, the agent's name isn't Stanley, it's Mansley. Also, I somehow had zero memory of pretty much the entire second act of the film. This is where Hogarth and the Giant meet Dean. This guy lives in a junkyard, and I think he must have inspired a young Mark Rober.
I'd like to apologize to everyone in advance for this.
Squirrels aside, this guy is an artist. And it's thanks to Dean that the Giant discovers a love for making things while reconciling with the realization that he himself is a weapon. Contrasting this with the battle later in the film made me truly appreciate what this movie actually is. It's the story of a machine built for nothing but death and destruction that instead chose to save lives and make things. It is the answer to the question that director Brad Bird asked when he first pitched the movie 25 years ago. What if a gun had a soul? The tools and machines we work with sometimes gain a value that goes beyond their purpose. We don't all find a giant robot in the woods behind our house, but if we're lucky, we have the chance to work with a machine that we'd come to love. Whether that's an aging camera, an old project car, or whatever other beloved device we choose to express ourselves with. Over the course of time, we struggle, and we learn, and we grow, thanks to that machine. It's there with us in moments of achievement and success, and it's there as we're forced to reconcile and accept our own failures and inadequacies. That simple, soulless piece of technology helps us to better understand ourselves. And this is when something paradoxical and miraculous can happen. Sometimes, with work and care, little by little, and each in our own way, through monumental effort, and without even trying, we can give that machine a soul.